Most people are trying to grow and maintain their physical assets, which is money, property, and their other belongings. But many people forget that intangible assets are as important, if not even more important than these tangible assets. Health is not something that we can just catch up on, and neither is love, family, or friendship. These are all intangible assets which also have to be grown and maintained. An important note about assets. Assets provide a flow of benefits over a certain time period. And while we know that tangible assets can also depreciate, people often forget that intangible assets, family, love, health, and relationships can also depreciate. That is, for example, one of the reasons why what you've learned in university 5 or 10 years ago might not be that relevant or that up to date anymore. Or why that six-pack that you managed to get around 2 years ago can now suddenly be gone if you don't continue to work on it. The authors of The 100-Year Life call these intangible assets vitality assets. These are those kind of assets that are crucial to keep you alive. You know, if you're playing a game, there is usually a kind of energy indicator at the bottom left or right of the screen. Unfortunately, in real life, we humans do not have access to that kind of energy indicator that can easily show us what the status of our vitality assets are. I could imagine that if we had that kind of indicator for each part of our life, for each of our vitality assets, then it would be much more difficult for us to just simply ignore them. But because we don't have this, most of the time we're not really aware what our status in all of these areas are, and what we tend to do is just rush through life and try to get to retirement as quickly as possible, accumulating as many assets as possible, and promise ourselves that once we arrive, once we get to that finish line, then we will finally start to live, enjoy life, and maybe search for meaning. The problem is that it is not as easy to measure or put a clear value on these intangible assets. As Linda Gratton, one of the authors of The 100-Year Life, pointed out, economists are able to infer how we value different activities from the kind of choices that we make, but still it is really difficult to assign a clear monetary value to these intangible assets. For example, it would be really difficult to value or compare 1 hour you spend doing exercise to keep your body healthy versus 1 hour spent on learning a new language. But what we can do, at least, she says, is that we can infer the direction, meaning that we can make observations about whether a particular intangible asset has increased in value or decreased in value. Just simply look at your friendships. If you look at the number of friends or close friends that you have around you, you can simply look at the quality of relationships that you have with them and make an observation about whether you think the value has increased or decreased over the last 1 or 2 years. If we talk about health issues in a potentially longer life, it becomes even more important to take care of your health. And I quote here a very important insight from The 100-Year Life, which is, the cost of being incapacitated from work aged 50 when life expectancy is 100 is much greater than when life expectancy was 70. This means that while a longer life is potentially a gift, in a longer life there are also a lot more years during which you can potentially suffer from illness if you do not take enough care of your health. Vitality assets, which are intangible assets, are very closely linked to tangible assets. They are not isolated and you can't just separate them from each other. We can't just say, I'm not really feeling that healthy, but I have a great career, so I'm fine. It just doesn't work that way, because there is a thing called emotional spillover between health and career as well as other areas of your life. And I want to give you 2 examples here. If you are a healthy person and you have emotionally healthy relationships at home, then you will mostly be in a positive mood and you will have these positive emotions. So when you go to work and start your working day, you will automatically carry over these positive emotions into your work. And that will not only show in your actual work and the result in your productivity, but that will also carry over into your relationships with other people at work. And that in turn, your relationship with your peers, your coworkers, and your boss, that will ultimately affect your career and also your earning potentials. And the opposite also applies. If you are in general unhealthy and often depressed, and in addition to that, have fights with your spouse or other people at home all of the time and carry a lot of resentment, those emotions will eventually carry over into your workplace. That will show in your relationship with your coworkers and your boss. You will not be able to fully concentrate on your work and be productive, and your colleagues and your boss will also feel that you carry a lot of negative emotions around with you, and that will ultimately affect your career prospects, and the possibilities for you to get promoted and so on. And this is also why your partner choice will affect your career so much. So in case you are not yet in a relationship, keep that in mind when you are looking for a partner. Look for someone with whom you can have an emotionally stable and an emotionally healthy relationship, because in the end it will spill over and affect all the other areas of your life. And vice versa, if at work you feel stressed and burned out all of the time and have a lot of frustrations and anxiety, you will also carry those negative, anxious feelings over once you get home. It would require an immense amount of willpower and discipline to just instantly change your mood the moment that you step inside the house. Usually it's not possible. Usually what happens is that person will come home and be in an angry mode, in a stressed mode, and that will reflect in the interactions that he or she has with the other family members. And now during the pandemic and in general the trend of more people working from home, separating your work life, your career, and your private life becomes even more difficult. Imagine that at 6:30 p.m., shortly before you're about to have dinner, you get into a conversation on WhatsApp or Skype chat with one of your colleagues or your boss, and let's say that this interaction was rather negative. Then that will likely carry over into your dinner session, into your conversations with your spouse. You might feel irritated and you might not be able to fully concentrate on having dinner with your family. And you can imagine how a series of all these effects will accumulate over the long time. And I'm sure that each one of us has in some way experienced something like this. So if you'd like to share any of your experiences, feel free to drop them in the comments below. And from these simple examples, it becomes obvious how important it is for us to work on our vitality assets, our family, health, and relationships, so that we can have more fulfilling careers. And a very important distinction here to make is that I'm not talking about successful careers, at least not in an objective sense. Let's take, for example, Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein was known to not having a very great relationship with his spouse, with his wife. Was he successful? Yeah, I would say everyone would say that he was successful. But did he have a fulfilling career, a meaningful career? I honestly don't know. I do believe that people can become successful, although all their vitality assets, their family, health, relationships are a total mess. They can still be successful in their careers. But the question is, will they have a fulfilling career or not? And this is also what you need to ask yourself in developing your career. Is what you're looking for a successful career, something that by society is regarded as successful, or are you looking for a fulfilling and meaningful career? And that might be subjective. Let's talk about friendships now. Linda Gratton has this other book called The Shift, where she talks about long-established and rich friendships, which she also calls regenerative community. And these are not your co-workers or just your acquaintances, but these are friendships that you've built over a long period of time. Friends that you've known since high school or university, or even friends that you had since your time in kindergarten. She emphasizes those kind of friendships which are multi-stranded, meaning that you've known these friends in different kinds of situations. For example, you know your friend at home when they're with their family and with their kids, but you've also experienced time together in a different situation. For example, when you did rock climbing together or took some course together, and you also share some common interests. And the key difference between these kind of friendships this regenerative community versus just regular friends is that these friendships are very emotionally laden. And what this means is that if you were to ever lose this friend or had a big fight with this friend or broke up your relationship completely, then it would really devastate you. It wouldn't be an easy thing to deal with. I've moved around the world a lot during my life, and I feel that it was really difficult to maintain those few true friendships that I had. I had a few really good friends from high school and from university who I managed to keep in touch with, although just through the occasional email, WhatsApp chat, or video call. So while I moved around the world to Germany and then to Indonesia again, to Singapore and to Canada finally, somehow I still managed to keep in touch with these friends, and I can't tell you how much I cherish these friendships. And I know that even though we don't stay in contact as much, if something were to happen in my life, something bad or very upsetting, that I could just pick up the phone, call them and talk to them and tell them everything that's on my mind, and we would just pick up from where we left off the last time, even though the last phone call might have been 1 year ago. So these are some friends from high school and from my university time, people that I can completely trust with my emotions and whatever is going on in my life. Around 10 years ago, I had around 5, 6, or even 7 of these kinds of friendships. But I just realized that over the years, I failed to maintain these friendships so that I have fewer and fewer of these. But after reading about the concept of vitality assets, I reminded myself how important it is to maintain these friendships because, as I said earlier, these friendships are intangible assets in the truest sense, and they too can depreciate. And it's actually kind of sad that it takes reading from some book that a stranger wrote that you should remember to keep in touch with your friends, right? But that's how life is. Another perspective that Linda Gratton shared in her 100-Year Life book is this. She says that these kind of friendships, they provide the backdrop to a working life, and often when they reach back in time, they support the narrative and commentary about life and identity. And this is so true because there are so many things that are going on in my life year after year, and sometimes it's only once or twice that I get in touch and have a chat, a longer chat with one of my friends from high school or from university, and once we talk, usually we start from where we left off, and they would start off by asking me how my life is in general and what has happened since the last time that I made a film and what my plans are in the coming months and the coming year. So while I'm talking to them, and I can do this in a very honest way, I am kind of summarizing my near past, present, and future, and that ties everything up together neatly. And the most beautiful thing is that when they ask me, "How are you?" it is not just a conversation starter, but they actually want to know, they are genuinely interested to know how my life is doing, how my health is, how my family is, how my career is doing. They are genuinely interested and want to know that I'm doing okay. But now the biggest question is, how can you possibly balance intangible and tangible assets? It requires constantly looking at your life and honestly asking yourself, what is lacking at the moment? Which areas are out of balance? Which areas of my life have taken a backseat in these past years? And which areas of my life are pretty low on the energy indicator? And balancing here doesn't mean that you try and make everything equal, that you allot the same amount of time to all of your activities. Balancing here just means that you move in a way that you don't fall. Like when you're riding a bicycle, in order to move forward, you need to get out of balance, but you also need to quickly get back on track again. And there are obviously phases in life where you need to focus more on one area and also spend more time and energy on that one area. The important thing is that it is not a long-term thing or a lifelong thing, that you don't spend your entire life only focusing on one area. And here are some examples. During time in university or in college, usually people focus 100% or at least most of their time studying, taking exams, and trying to get the best grades that they can. And oftentimes during this time, people kind of neglect their relationships with their family or with their old friends. They simply are too absorbed in campus life and don't have time for that. And that's okay. But once this is done, once those 2 to 4 years are over, you got to remind yourself to get things more into balance again, and reaching out to your family, maybe your mom or your dad whom you haven't spoken to in 6 months or whatever. And likewise, there might also be a time where you are fully dedicated towards building your career and climbing up the corporate ladder. And during that time, some people also forget to maintain their relationships. And in fact, there are many people who are already a bit older who are lamenting the fact that they didn't get the chance to have a serious relationship. And I would say that it is in part, of course not fully, but in part because their focus has been fully on their career. And some people are so focused on work and career that they don't think at all about how they eat, about their nutrition, and whether they exercise or not. And one day they are 50 or 60 years old and they suddenly wake up and are surprised at the fact that they have high cholesterol and high blood sugar levels. As soon as you find that you are not as healthy, even if you are still very young in your 20s or in your 30s, then it's a clear signal that you need to take a step back and try to bring other things, your health, in balance. You need to take some time where you focus on revitalizing and prioritizing your health before you make the next step and climb up the career ladder again. On the other hand, there are also cases where people are so dedicated and focused on their families, and this is oftentimes the case for women, that they completely forget about their career. For a decade or 2 decades, they spend most of their time looking after their family, preparing meals, looking after their children, and they completely neglect their career and don't do anything about it. And then when they're 45 or they're 50, they feel the urge to want to go back into the workforce. But what I often see happening is that once the kids grow up and leave the house can suddenly feel very empty, and some people might feel that they want to go back and restart their career again, but they really don't know where to start because all this time, for these 1 or 2 decades, they haven't worked at all on developing their career. Many millennials and those of you who belong to Generation Z have a high chance of getting to 100 years old. In fact, according to research, 50% of people born in the year of 1987 will likely get to 98 to 100 years old, while 50% of those born in 1997 will even reach the age of 100 to 102. Basically, there is an increase in life expectancy of 2 to 3 years for each decade. So depending on which year you were born in, you can work yourself forward or backward. So let's say that you watching right now have a very good chance to get to 100 years old. Knowing that, would that change the way that you live your life in any way? And would it change the way that you plan and structure your life? For most people, a longer life is a gift, but I can say for sure that people don't just want to live longer, but they want to be healthy and also functional during the time that they live. And what most people want is friendship, love, and family. And the older we get, the more we tend to value these things. The problem is that most people only realize this too late in their life. Have you ever seen these people around you who are around 50 or 60 years old, who are very well off financially, but who have worked so hard, are so stressed out, and are so burnt out, and in the end have some kind of critical illness and spend the remaining 20 to 30 years of their life treating their illness? What I see as one of the biggest threats for an imbalanced life is to follow a 3-stage model, which means education, work, and then retirement. This classical model simply doesn't work for a longer 100-year life. And this is the reason. When life expectancy used to be 80 years at one point in time, this three-stage model would look more or less like this. People would get an education until they're 22 or 23, and then they would go into the workforce and work until they were 55 or 60, after which they would retire. And then their retirement would last for about 20 years. And that kind of made sense, but in a potential 100-year life, this model would make less sense. Imagine that you were to live to 100 years and would follow this three-stage model. So this would either mean that you finish your education at around 22, 23, and then you continue to work until you're 80, and after that you retire for 20 years. Or the alternative would be that you still retire at around 55 or 60, but then you would retire for 40 years, which would be an awful long stretch and would also be really difficult to finance. I find that the multi-staged model, which is introduced in the book 100-Year Life, makes much more sense. What this means is that we alternate between phases of education, work, and retirement. Instead of having one stage where you complete all of your education, you spread out your education across several stages throughout your life. So you could go to university in your 20s, but then perhaps in your late 30s take a postgraduate degree, and then in your 50s you take a course to upgrade your skills, and so on. And many people nowadays are already doing this, but the key difference is that many people are doing this reactively in reaction to a crisis, a life crisis they are facing, instead of planning for that in advance. I think that if you know in advance, if you are prepared in advance that there will be stages in your life where you spend some time, take off time from work and get a second education, or take time off to upgrade your skills, then it somehow provides a sense of calm, knowing that you do not have to do and complete everything at once at the beginning of your life. And in terms of work, instead of having this one super long stretch where you work non-stop, you can consciously try and break up work into different stages. So in between you can take off some time to spend more time with your family and your kids. And in terms of work, instead of having this one super long stretch where for 40 to 50 years you work non-stop without any significant break other than your 21 days vacation that you get per year, you can consciously decide in advance to break up the super long work phase into several stages, so you can take off some time in between and spend some time with your family. And in terms of retirement, instead of rushing to retirement, working non-stop until you're 55 or 60, and then retiring for 40 years until the end of your life, you can break up this retirement into mini retirement phases. For example, you do a mini retirement for 1 year here and for 2 years there. And retirement here doesn't mean that you take off time from work and do completely nothing, because during this time you can work on personal projects that are meaningful to you. You can take some time off to think about starting your own business, or maybe work towards becoming self-employed, and so on. But it's not that easy. I'm pretty sure that many people are going to say this in the comments, and it's true. It is not easy at all. It requires a lot of planning. It also requires a certain amount of risk-taking. But is it worth it? I do think it's worth it, because it will ultimately increase the chance that you will be able to live a fulfilling life and have a fulfilling career over a long period of time. Does this sound impossible to you, or does this sound intriguing? Please let me know in the comments down below. By the way, this is the second part of a 3-part episode on intangible assets based on the book 100 Life by Linda Gratton and Andrew Scott. So if you found this valuable and interesting, you might also like the first episode where I talk about productive assets. And in that case, you might want to subscribe and also hit the little alarm bell so you don't miss out on the third episode, which will be coming out soon, and where I will talk about transformational assets. Don't forget to check out my other videos where I talk about building a fulfilling and meaningful career. As always, I thank you so much for watching. I wish you all the best and have an awesome day.